There is a time when God requires us to obey Him, even when it hurts. You know, sometimes we have to obey God, even when it doesn't make sense. Sometimes we have to obey God even when it hurts. Sometimes we have to obey God, even when it seems like we're going to lose everything. But if we obey God, He will help us. He will be with us. And so today I want to share with you 3 powerful lessons that I learned about the spiritual power of obedience. Even when it hurts. No. 1. We must learn to hear God's voice. In order for us to obey God, we must first hear His voice. Hear me now. In order for you to receive direction from God, you must develop your spiritual ears. In order for you to receive wisdom from God, you must develop your spiritual eyes. There are people who don't obey God because they never heard God speak. And there are people who do obey God because they heard God speak, but chose not to listen. So many times in the Bible, God spoke to people through dreams, through visions, through Urim, through Thummim, through prophets, through their innermost being, through their circumstances, through their environment. The Holy Spirit will speak to you through His Word, through prayer, through the prompting of the Holy Spirit, through circumstances that come into your life, through the people that God brings into your life. So learn to hear God's voice. Lesson No. 2. We must learn to trust God's voice. There are people who hear God's voice and choose not to trust it. They say things like, "Who am I? I'm just a nobody." Or "What do you mean? That's impossible." Or "That doesn't make any sense. That would be crazy to do." Or "I've done this my whole life. Why would I change?" Listen, God can do what He says. If He tells you go, you go. If He tells you stop, you stop. If He tells you forward, you go forward. If He tells you wait, you wait. Trust God's voice. And lesson No. 3. We must learn to obey God's voice. There are people who hear God's voice, and they trust His voice, but they don't obey His voice. Obey God's voice. There are people who said, "Yes, Lord, I hear you." "Yes, Lord, I believe what you're saying." "Yes, Lord, I trust you." But no, I'm not willing to give up my dream. I'm not willing to give up my plans. I'm not willing to give up my comfort. I'm not willing to give up my reputation. Listen, if you truly hear God's voice, if you truly trust God's voice, then you'll have no other choice but to obey God's voice. My question for you today: are you hearing God's voice? Are you trusting God's voice? Are you obeying God's voice? If you're not hearing God's voice, then begin to seek it. Begin to pray. Begin to read the Word. Not trusting God, then begin to remind yourself of who God is. Remind yourself of what God has said. Remind yourself of what God has done in your life. And not obeying God's voice, then begin to ask God for the strength, the courage, the faith, the belief, the conviction to do what God has called you to do. God bless you.